Well, it's a pleasure to be connected to Tokyo and the person you see on the screen in front of you, Tim Hornyak, who recently wrote a piece in the Times newspaper as a journalist based in Tokyo about a particular aspect of the memorialization of the bombings in 1945. And this is memory keepers, Tim. So let's go in with that. Memory keepers, what are they?
Well, as you know, there are very few hibakusha left, the survivors of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the idea is that by training people as memory keepers, they will become intimately familiar with the experiences of these hibakusha, and they will be able to carry on the testimonials that some of these hibakusha have been presenting over the decades to new generations of people to keep the experiences alive, the memories alive, and it's a way of ensuring that this sort of oral memory, firsthand transmission from the original eyewitnesses, survivors, continues into the future.
So, how many survivors are there? Well, survivors who are willing to talk about the experience of the bombing.
Yes, there seems to be only a few dozen, maybe about 30 or so, who are willing and able to talk about what happened to them in August 1945. And because of that, the city, since about 2012, has been training people to become memory keepers. And now there are roughly 240 such memory keepers, ranging in all age across the spectrum from younger people to older people. And they go through a training period and they become very familiar, as I say, with the experiences of the hibakusha and the victims, the people who did not survive.
From, if I remember rightly from your article, this training is actually really quite extensive in terms of the time that they're doing it.
Yes, this can cover multiple years. First, there's a learning period. If it's dealing with a person who's still alive, there's learning from that survivor of their experiences. There's also learning about you have to know a lot about the city and its geography, its history, where people were located at the time of the bombing, what they were doing. There were people outside, there were people inside. What parts of the city were more heavily damaged than others, for example. And then there's a period in which the memory keeper has to produce a text, a draft of the testimonial or presentation that they plan to give once they're completed the training. And this may go through revisions by the survivor and other people involved until it's ready for presentation to the public.
Well, it's not exactly the same as an eyewitness survivor delivering that testimony, and so I'm just wondering how vivid it can be made in this slightly second-hand way.
Well, exactly. The question is, how is this different from other forms of recorded history or oral history, books, videos, movies, paintings, etc.? And I think that the lady, the memory keeper I interviewed, was mentioning how when she does her presentation, she does see tears in the eyes of her audience members, who can be children or adults, what have you. And that direct oral presentation, that direct sort of human element in the storytelling, I think is invaluable in getting this experience across the many years of time. It's been now 80 years and farther into the future.
But do they actually use the precise words of survivors that they've actually acquired by some means or other, or what is it, or just the force of language?
I think it's maybe a bit of both. I think some of these survivors have presented testimonials themselves, and the memory keeper can incorporate parts of those presentations into their own presentation. And it really depends on the individual. The idea is to get the basics of the story across, and of course, we they can use visual aids, maps of the city, um, showing the devastation that happened, the pictures of artifacts such as burnt clothing, other burnt artifacts, and I think that it may not be, as you say, as direct as firsthand account, but it's better than looking at objects under glass in a museum. As
Yeah.
powerful as those can be, when you have a person telling you the story, I think it makes a big difference.
So how widely do the memory keepers actually travel to deliver this?
I think they're mainly based in Hiroshima. I believe that some of them go on trips in Japan, perhaps even overseas. But my impression is that most of them seem to be based out of the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum, where this is all kept alive as in artifacts and exhibits and that sort of thing.
So the anticipation, Tim, is that there will be a throughput of visitors from around the world who receive these presentations, which of course begs the question about language and the ability to convey these stories. I mean, is that a problem, or how do they get round it?
I think so far it seems that many of the presentations are in Japanese to Japanese groups, including school children. I imagine, though, that because of the record-breaking numbers of tourists coming to Japan now, inbound tourists, uh, I think the museum is making efforts to open it up to visitors. Although with large numbers of visitors coming in, I think probably the easiest way to accommodate such numbers is just funneling them through the museum. But hopefully some of them are stopping and getting some of these first or secondhand presentations about what happened.
Yeah. Okay, it's largely delivered in the Japanese language, and I suppose that leads on to a question about just how far the different generations in Japan today are willing to talk about the war, and especially consider the build-up to the bombings.
It's a very difficult question. It also depends on where you are in Japan, the regions. There is a different awareness level in places like Tokyo compared to Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Um, my wife grew up in Nagasaki, and so for her, every summer was the time to relearn the story of the bombing of Nagasaki, along with all the other school kids in the prefecture. The same thing obtains in Hiroshima Prefecture. Whereas in Tokyo, my impression is that children are taught about it in school, but it's not as intense or detailed. I wonder whether children in school in Tokyo observe a moment of silence on those days as they do in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. I was once visiting my in-laws in Nagasaki, and the local newspaper came out on the day of the Nagasaki bombing. I opened it up and I was amazed to see a double-page spread of what looked like cobblestones on street service. And the idea was you would put down this double-page spread of newsprint on the floor, and you would stand on it and observe a moment of silence when it was the time of the bombing on that day. And so this is just one example of how I've been to the ceremony too in Nagasaki, the annual peace ceremony memorializing the event, and it was very moving. It's of course a very hot time. It's the environment is not the most comfortable in the world because it's so humid and hot. But everyone's out there. The mayor's out there. The hibakusha are there. The school children are there in this intense heat, and yeah, they're all praying for the souls of the victims, and they're praying for nuclear disarmament.
I'm sure it didn't surprise you to look at the reader comments that came up underneath your article in the Times, and of course, a number of people saying, "Well, look, it's all right memorializing the suffering of people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but what about all the British prisoners of war and the terrible things that the Japanese army did?" I mean, that wouldn't have surprised you, but how would you answer them insofar as that's not referenced in your piece, Tim?
I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. One can feel sympathy for human beings on either side of a conflict. My mother grew up in Lincolnshire and during the wartime, and she told me about returnee soldiers who were returning to her town, and they were interned in Japanese camps, and they were walking skeletons, absolutely emaciated. Of course, that's was an appalling treatment of those people. Um, but to feel that way, does it preclude one from feeling empathy toward civilians, women, and children who are incinerated in such an act? I'm not here to judge, and I'm not here to tell people what to think, what to feel. I was just telling the story of this woman who became a memory keeper in Hiroshima because she felt that's something that she had to do.
The ultimate message here is one of about promoting peace. You've referenced that in our conversation here, and I wonder, can one in any way gauge the cut through of this message and say, well, look, it's resulted in this, that, or the other. And Hiroshima's devoted so much of the last 80 years to promoting this peace agenda. But does it really cut through, especially when we're looking at a world now where you'd have thought so many lessons from the past have been forgotten?
Indeed. We see all these efforts by the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and international outreach and efforts toward nuclear disarmament. Um, we may have fewer nuclear weapons than in the past, but they still present an existential threat to our species. We also see a disconnect between those two cities and the official policies of the government of Japan, which benefits from the US nuclear umbrella and is not so willing to harshly condemn uh, nuclear weapons and to sign up for the Test Ban Treaty and the abolition of nuclear weapons internationally. And it has these three policies, the government of Japan, of not possessing or allowing the possession of nuclear weapons in its territory. And when it recovered the territory of Okinawa from the United States in 1972, the United States had built nuclear launch sites on that island, and it had to remove the missiles. And there's only one launch site left, so it was recently reopened to the public, and people can see the real physical presence of nuclear weapons on Japanese soil there. So there is this disconnect between the people like President Obama who visited uh, Hiroshima, the Pope, etc., and the realpolitik of Japan not wanting to rock the boat too much and push for real nuclear disarmament. And I think that's going to be the situation for the foreseeable future.
Well, Tim, as a journalist, highly respected journalist over many years, of course, your job in a piece like this is to maintain a level of detachment and journalistic expertise. But you, underneath that, you must be deeply moved by some of the things that you read on this subject.
Of course, I mean, one cannot visit the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum without being moved, seeing some of the paintings that I've seen by the survivors of the absolute horrific experiences endured by some of these people. many of these people who survived, um, to see these childlike drawings by people who are not professional illustrators or painters by any stretch of, you know, people walking, victims who are barely alive, walking around with their intestines hanging out or their skin falling off or hanging off, and really, truly a hell on earth. And yeah, it is a terrible thing. So I really am amazed by the resilience of these people, like the memory keepers, like Aoki-san, who I interviewed, who can tell this story over and over and over again. And even though it may seem to fall on deaf ears among the elites of the world, and it has such horrific content, they are determined to keep on telling the story simply because they don't want it to happen again. They don't want there to be another nuclear war, wartime attack with nuclear weapons, because it's so indiscriminate, and it just turns people into vapor, or the Walking Dead, or terribly disfigured or emotionally deeply scarred survivors. And it's hard not to be moved by this. Yeah.
We could go on talking for a long time about this, Tim, but thank you so much for your time. Many things that people can take away from this interview, and I'm sure promote lots of thought on a very, very tricky subject, an ongoing subject indeed. Tim Hornyak, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.